Hi, this is Roy Samuelson. Welcome to the ADNA Presents. Today we have another special returning guest, Tanja Milojevic. Thank you for joining us, Tanja.
Thank you for having me.
We always ask what you love about audio description. It seems so trite. Do you have anything new that you love about audio description?
I love all the thought that goes into it and the art, the creativity, as well as, at the end of the day, trying to keep it as palatable for most audiences that are going to encounter it as possible. And this universal design approach that I think a lot of cultural institutions here in the U.S. are starting to take up. For example, national parks have been doing this for a while. Everyone's thinking about it as access for all more and more, which is just so wonderful to see.
It's great to see the universal design. Do you find that film and TV has had an influence on that spillover, or do you think it's more cultural?
I think Netflix tendency to start audio describing a lot more foreign content as well, making it available to audiences across the globe, as well as making it so easy to turn on the track and access. And then even places like Pluto TV that are fairly new streaming services, which are free. For example, Pluto TV you don't need to pay for as a streaming service. You can just watch content, even though it could do with some improvements, lots of improvements with accessibility. It's just getting started, but it also does have audio description. So it seems like this is something that more and more vendors are aware of, and those who are sighted even are treating it almost like an audiobook experience where they're encountering it as they're doing other things too, which is great. That's what we want.
It's so cool to see that curb effect on audio description.
Yes.
That you brought up the awareness, both from the streaming platforms as well as audiences. There's something else that I'd love to go back to, too, that you said about the improvements that they're just getting started. Whether it's Pluto TV or any other company, I'm finding that a lot of companies who are venturing into, from their perspective, uncharted territory in the sense of universal design or including audio description, that there's a lot to take in. It's a lot more than just a simple flip of a switch. And that as companies learn to integrate that universal design, specifically with audio description, that you said it so clearly. There's improvements that are going to be coming, but the way that you said it had such a positive tone to it. It felt aspirational and not shaming. Could we talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I think that now that awareness is spreading, from my perspective as someone with a visual impairment, I find it to be very, very important to appreciate that these various vendors are trying, cultural institutions are trying, people that have never done this, that now all of a sudden they're aware that there's this requirement that their exhibits, their sites have to be made accessible or more accessible in some way, and they're scrambling to figure out how to do it, looking at it as critical or thinking about it from a perspective of, well, this isn't objective enough, this isn't meeting by-the-book standards, if you will, of audio description. There is too much interpretation, novelization, whatever you want to call it. I see a lot of others in the blindness community doing this, and it really, it's chafy to me. It's frustrating because everyone is trying to do their best, and if you're putting people's efforts down immediately and you're not acknowledging that they're trying to learn, they're going to be intimidated and not want to continue. So, in my opinion, it should be from a positive perspective. We'll get a lot more done and a lot more of this to stick than if we're not encouraging and if we're not trying to help be part of the process and provide additional feedback that could help people learn step by step. Although I think constructive criticism is great, but complaining is not. It doesn't get you very far. So, that said, I think that a lot of places could do with feedback and continual feedback. For example, one area that I think many of us in the community agree, as well as yourself, is that we think that a lot of audio description gets lost. Companies like International Digital Center, Descriptive Video Works, and many more will put out content, and then you go to try to find it, and because it's been aired, say, in Canada, not the US, it's not available on our streaming services, even though you would expect it should be. And running that to ground, locating where this could have gone and why it's not being made available can be rough sometimes. So I personally, I put this out there as an idea. This isn't really to your question, but it's an idea that I think a lot of us think about. If there was a central streaming service that had all of this content that all of these networks are paying for, and they all got some sort of royalty share or agreement, maybe licensing agreement where they can renew, and they place all of this content in one place. That way, if you're visually impaired and you really are the target audience for this, and all the narrators and writers are putting forward all this effort, it should be made available in one place that you can then pay for monthly, like Netflix, like Apple TV Plus, and get access to it all in one place. You don't have to have 5 subscriptions. And maybe that's sort of not fair to others who have to subscribe to all of these various services. However, if you look at the content ratio, the ratio of audio described content to just purely what's available is a percentage. It's growing, but it's not quite equal. So I would argue that having one centralized place where you can access all of this would be fair in terms of accessibility standard. And I hope we get there someday. That would be, in my opinion, huge. That'd be ideal. No one's work would get lost.
It really is amazing how many times we've had conversations with a AD performer who has found out that someone else, an entirely different company, a different writer, a different performer, has done the audio description track for the exact same full series. I've been on both sides of that many times, where there was even one project where there were 3 different versions of the exact same content with ADs. So you addressing that need there is so... I could feel the vacuum. I could feel the gap there. And, obviously we've had these conversations. It seems so interesting. And here's another aspirational thing. I've found that if production itself owned the content and not the distribution platform, that would allow for that traveling from cinema to streaming, to have that ownership. For some reason, we can watch a show with Tom Cruise in, let's say, a Mission Impossible, and if we watch that internationally, it still stars Tom Cruise. For some reason, Tom Cruise is able to make it from one streaming service to another, so it's not like there's not a system in place. So it's a little bit of a stretch, but to your point, that idea of assembling all the different streaming services coming together to provide audio description for our blind audiences to access it, blind and low vision audiences. What I love about our conversations, Tanja, is that beyond you being an incredible voice talent, just go to your website. This is a perfect time to name it. So on Tanja M Voice, you've got some really great samples of what you do. So your skills are there, your talents are there. But what I love about our conversations is that you really see a perspective beyond just reading a script into a microphone. This example you just gave, let's assemble everything together. Or I'm going to start working in some other different areas and see what bubbles up and what I can do. The initiative of pioneering ideas always comes up in our conversations. Is there anything else along that line that we could talk a little bit more?
Yeah. One, for example, pioneering idea with voice talent in mind is Imagination Video Books, for example, is taking children's books that we all know and love, as well as ones that express ideas around diversity, inclusion, and disability, where it's teaching kids about those things as well as emotions. And they're all audio described, both in the Braille version itself, but also where there's a textual description. By that I mean, where also they have a video of the content of that story with a narrator and talent who are performing the audio description itself. Then they have a couple of productions where they're almost like a radio drama style, where they've got multiple actors, music, sound effects. So they're really trying to include people with various disabilities and visual impairments, actors, in a great place. I thought about this idea myself, and there's a lot of writers who are writing books for young adults, for example, or even older books for adults in their 20s, 30s, etc., various topics. But it would be so neat to have, say, like a full cast audiobook company that is focused on bringing books from writers with disabilities, and even maybe writers who have content that they have not brought it to publishing yet, and they want audiences to hear it, but maybe they're not there yet. They don't have the ability to market them. It's almost a similar idea to imagination video books, but not. It's different in the sense that these are books that are written. They're not illustrated where they would need to be described, but they're novels for young adults where you're then taking that concept and you're dramatizing it with a narrator and music and so forth, and then bringing it to life, possibly raising money through like Kickstarter or something to fund it, because no one has that kind of money up front to be able to pay for that endeavor. That's costly. But bringing actors who are visually impaired or have other disabilities who want to have that chance and maybe want to break into the industry and have credits, that would be a very neat endeavor to explore down the line. And it just takes one or two who are willing to embark on that journey. But I've thought about that down the line. I think it would be a nice additional opportunity to give people that they can find easily and not be so worried about, well, I don't have credits. No one's going to give me a chance. Because you have to have some sort of credits before you can get larger roles that are quality that you can then really showcase. That's what I found. Just networking, and more networking.
And going back to what you said earlier, that disability does matter, that those opportunities are hard to come from. And when they come, it's almost like the stakes are so high for this one opportunity where other people are privileged enough to have many opportunities to be able to, I'm going to call it fail safely, that it's not a high stakes situation where here's this opportunity to play and to explore and see, oh, I've got this skill. Let me explore this a little bit. Oh, I can tweak it. I can do things a little bit differently. That these opportunities in this concept that you're proposing would bring greater access to those opportunities, which can only help develop the skills, assuming that that's the direction that someone would want to go to.
Exactly. I think for me, too, I think for many actors, there's always that anxiety where you're going into a recording session, a directed session, whatever, table read, it doesn't matter. Whatever the term is, the end result is you got to be on your game. And there's always that worry where you're like, well, if I screw it up enough, they definitely won't want to work with me again. And sure, you can keep applying for other things, but it's like when you do start working with someone new, there's always that period of time where you're starting to work with them where they feel a little bit awkwarded out or out of their depth, like, I don't know, what am I supposed to do? So you've got to make them feel comfortable initially, which that's just the way it is. But to your point about there are many more chances where if you don't have a disability and you can just go, boom, read the thing right off the bat, cold read, and you can nail it. And that's fun. You can just go and really just, there's not that stress of it on top of, oh my God, I have to format this. I have to practice it, make sure I can read through it fluently and I'm not stumbling and not hearing half of what I'm listening to. You can mess it up and then just be like, yeah, whatever. You know what? It's okay. I can just audition for another several things. But sometimes, once in a great while, when you have a disability, run into that sort of, let's either not disclose to them because I don't want them to know, or let me try to make them feel as comfortable as possible. So it's like starting over again, and it's a slower process of building rapport in some cases, and that can be a little intimidating.
I can only imagine. And that agency that a person with a disability has to be able to decide, I do want to disclose or I don't want to disclose, that it needs to be their decision and not forced upon them because of the limits of accessibility. Is that a fair statement?
Definitely. I think a lot of the times it's very possible not to feel like you have to disclose because they'll send you a script and it'll be like, a recording session on this, or send in the lines when you're done, that kind of thing. Then it's on you to get your process down. Sometimes when you're doing a representation thing, that's always a question for me is representation is amazing. But of course, if you're going to audition for a role where it's representation based, you're playing someone who's, say, in my case, someone who's visually impaired or blind, they're going to know. And they're very worried that they're not going to do something right. They're a little bit anxious, like, oh, am I doing everything I'm supposed to? And that always makes me feel bad. I just want to put them at ease, So in that case, yes, of course, they're going to know. But that's not a bad thing. Then sometimes eventually if you're on a table read and everybody has to have their cameras on or whatever it is, and maybe reading at a certain pace or doing something and like, okay, there's a chance I'm not going to be able to keep up with the pace, then it might be best to let them know. And that can get a little bit awkward, but it's just par for the course,
Yeah, and I'm hearing with that decision that you gave the example of, for example, specifically casting for identity for a disability that would be disclosed. I think there's a tie-in to a conversation we had earlier in this very interview when we were talking about the efforts of companies to meet the requirements of accessibility, of the universal design, that there is that sense of intimidation. And without giving a free pass, but by getting those organizations or those contacts at the organizations less intimidated and more open to developing this kind of universal design, being receptive to feedback. I think you had used the word feedback in that example, how that clearly ties into your experience here with, for example, a table read or the access for those opportunities or sessions, in the sense that in those auditions, in those real world examples of recordings, that there are sometimes people get worried of quote unquote doing it wrong, and they're gonna put this awkward perspective of, oh, so sorry, I didn't mean to do that, and I just am trying, that puts everybody off, and it's like, so you're now doing not only your job as a talent but also doing your job as accessibility and also caretaking, in a sense. It's like, hey, listen, I'm gonna try to guide you through this, and that's a lot.
Well, honestly, I don't mind that at all. What I worry about is if they're too awkwarded out, they're just going to find some way to be like, well, I had this representation, I did this, I've checked this off, or, maybe not check it, maybe they don't think about it that way, but hey, I did this, and in the future, maybe I won't cast this person again because either this was awkward, or they held me back a little bit, or this went a little slower. But I think partly that's probably my own. I always worry that if my process is a little bit slower, I'm going to be slowing someone else down. It's like sometimes it can definitely be sort of a self-critical aspect. And I think there's that balance for some of us as well. As actors, we all fight this feeling where we're like, we're only as good as our last performance. We're only as good as X, Y, and Z. Or, oh, this person found that we had to repeat this section or this scene many times. Maybe they're going to be frustrated and not want to work with me again. That kind of thing that we have in the back of our mind about performance, I think, because we're always trying to improve and learn and get better. And so I think sometimes when you have additional things that slow you down in your process, you worry that that's going to be even more of a problem than it is for others. I know I definitely have that anxiety, if you will.
And it's amazing how that anxiety shows itself. You found a way to work through it. And thank you, by the way, for being so vulnerable in this conversation. This has been, we're really diving in here.
Everyone has worries, I think.
Yeah, we were talking earlier about audiobooks in the context of imagination. And I'm also experiencing, well, you've experienced also in audiobooks, the work as a narrator of audiobooks and what that entails, the marathon that it is. Is there anything you could share with our audience about the differences or maybe even some similarities between audio description performance and audiobook narration?
Yeah, I think that both merit emotion. So the subtlety of emotion needs to be enough where it's conveying how you feel, but you're not going over the top too much with it. Because it can take the person out of the performance, out of the entertainment a little bit. If you're relaying something in an audiobook, for example, and it's a sad scene, maybe you're relaying a memory, and it's a memory that's very sad that kind of makes you contemplate your past a little bit. Your voice might slow down a little, and you might sound a little bit sadder than normal, and sort of pause a little more. And then when an action scene comes up, obviously you're going to want to talk faster and a little bit more punchier. So the tone has to match what's going on. And that's the same thing with audio description. I think also the other thing is, for example, I was listening to someone's performance the other day, and it was a fantasy film where it merited intensity. But the intensity, it was like this sort of quiet intensity that they gave to the performance, and it fit so well. It kept you on the edge of your seat and saw them as the storyteller, almost like an additional narrator to the story. Their voice really, really fit well. And of course, when there were action scenes, they talked a little bit faster and there was a little bit more intensity to their delivery, but they always held that same tone of quiet intensity and like mystery almost that tone was very, very consistent. I was blown away by just the consistency of the persona that the voice actress put forward in that whole film, but at the same time added layers of intensity here and there where it's supposed to go. So then you compare this to a book, and if it's a first-person audiobook where you are playing a protagonist and this protagonist is telling the story, it's a little bit different than maybe a narrator who is a third-person narrator who's explaining what's happening almost like a fly-on-the-wall perspective. I can see that sort of narrator, the third-person perspective being a little bit, and I've heard this in books, it's a little less intense, a little less personal. It sounds maybe more like a drier narration, but not dry in a way where I'm trying to say that it's not engaging. It's engaging, but it's more objective sounding. It's not as invested. And this delivery definitely sounds intense where it should, a little bit more intense, but faster, and you're kind of on the edge of your seat. Versus when it's a first person, they're going to be way more affected on a niche level by everything happening in that book. So you're going to hear them sad, happy, excited, confused, whatever, all of it, and it's all going to match their dialogue. But their dialogue might be a little bit more intense at times versus their narration, which might sound more thoughtful.
When you use the word consistency, I hear consistency in the sense of matching the tone, the consistent match. In other words, in one very intense film for 90 minutes, there might be 500-600 cues of an audio description performer who does vary and use that subtlety of emotion. So it's not all sounding like a promo for a scary horror film. It has that modulation, and that modulation is part of the consistency. I think there's been a real misunderstanding of, well, this whole show is a comedy, so now all of a sudden we've got an AD performer where every single line is read in this condescending musicality, which takes us all out. Your comparison with the audiobook narrator and the AD performer, that subtlety, that joining of the storytelling, it's so crucial. So I love that word consistency came up in a way that it's not every line is the same, but it's the consistency of matching the tone. Is that a fair assumption?
Oh, exactly. It's like imagining yourself when you're an AD performer, almost like a character persona that you're bringing to that story. And that tone that you bring to it, whether it's your natural tone, and then you're adding a little bit of your personality here and there, that's exactly what it is you are the same persona throughout with a little bit of emotion that matches each scene that you're telling, because you are a secondary storyteller.
I love that emotion is still a part of it. And I do see it as, and I think you'd agree with me, it's a high wire act, that it's not you're phoning in the performance by giving less of an emotional performance. But I'd be totally turned off if Ophelia in some Shakespeare's Hamlet play is just screaming and crying the entire performance. If there's no, subtlety to it, that there's real power in that decisive choosing of that emotion and choosing how much and how little. You use the word subtlety. That's that nuance.
Definitely. Yeah, I can think of a couple of, the first one that comes to mind is honestly the performance in The Crown of the narrator. I don't know, I think I've brought this up before. I probably have.
Yes, you have. Yeah.
I love that performance. It is so subtle with how she sounds sad in certain areas, or even World War II on the Front Lines, which is a recent, very dark, disturbing documentary, by the way, that came out on Netflix a couple months ago. The narrator does such a great job of blending into the scene that he's describing.
We've explored so many great topics here already. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with our audience?
I'd be curious about what your thoughts, too, are on audiobooks and around your experience with them. I can just say that retakes and pickups, they were probably the thing that made me cringe the most, because it's so difficult a couple weeks later to match the tone that you had originally in that performance and that energy. Different time of day, different exhaustion level. Maybe your voice just isn't hydrated. You didn't drink enough water or what have you. And it's just no matter how much you try, you can still hear the pickup later when you're listening to the finished product. I'm wondering what your thoughts are around performance in audiobooks and your experience too.
Sure. As a audiobook listener, I do have a clear sense of when someone went back for a pickup. It is clear. And then other times, it seems like it blends in a lot. If I could pivot back to audio description and then come back to audiobooks, one of the disadvantages I have in certain experiences is that I don't have access to my original recording, the line before, the line after. I can do my best guess, but without a sample, I'm at a disadvantage, and I know it's not going to match for the exact same reasons that you mentioned. Maybe I recorded it in the morning, and then this is in the afternoon, or I had a little too many jalapenos, or whatever it is. Things can change, or I had a really happy thing happen, and all of a sudden that's going to come through in my voice that I need to be able to match. So I'm really glad you brought that up. My experience in audiobooks, most of my pickups happen pretty shortly after. So I'm able to, if not on the fly, make corrections that once the pickups come. I do feel like I've got a sense, like I said, with the audio description example, if I can have the context of where I am, I can do a better job of matching myself and trying to modulate that. But the frustration is still there. And it's, I'm not the only one to say marathon, that with audio description, we've got several hundred cues, but it's kind of like this hokey pokey, kind of step in, step out in between lines of dialogue. With the audiobook, it is, in most cases, unless you're working with another narrator, you're on your own, and it's a one-person show. And so everything has to matter. And it's funny how working in audiobooks and other aspects of voiceover has helped my performance within audio description. I'm sure you say the same thing. You've experienced the same thing just because of the exposure of getting words out of your mouth.
Yes. And I figure out what's a tongue twister that you wouldn't think would be a tongue twister. Then for audio description, sometimes you have 7 seconds and it's really long thing that you have to say. So you have to talk really fast so that you can get everything in. And you have to do 15 takes just to not to stumble, not to have a mouth noise. Or maybe the takes, you're like, yes, I did it. And you listen to it, you're like, no. The tone is horrible. Wow, this is not going to work. Let's do it again. So you figure out, you really start learning emphasis when you do audiobooks. I learned really quick. A lot of the times I was emphasizing the wrong word in the sentence or the wrong words in that paragraph and really had to sit down, read it, and be like, all right, what is the intent? What should be emphasized here for this character? When we talk, in general conversation, we emphasize things without even realizing we're doing it. And that's how we come across as passionate about something, or that's how we come across as animated in our conversation. So it's all emphasis. And I've started paying attention to what people emphasize when they talk, when they speak, what I emphasize, why I'm emphasizing it. And then when I read it, I try to pay attention to, now, this person would probably emphasize X, Y, and Z if they're talking. And that's really helped with those parts of my performance. And I really think I've improved after having to go through 3 long, 10-hour books each of doing the narration and the dialogue, which we recorded separately. So, yeah, it's always a learning process. What I would love is if there were more obvious places where we as talent who want to find more work could find it. There are a couple places I think it's called the Disabled Voice Acting Network, for instance, which is a nice place to start. I don't find that there's a whole lot coming out of that yet, but that doesn't mean it won't grow. But it's a great place. But if there even was other maybe Facebook groups or other places, which kind of brings me back to the whole idea of wanting to help writers who are writing, say, young adult novels, wanting to get them dramatized or wanting to get them in audio format. I'd love to make that a reality and present a place where people can get work and really have an easier time of finding it, rather than really you're just combing Facebook. You're combing various casting websites and auditioning and then mainly networking. You're mainly going to get work through networking with others and complimenting others' work and really listening and supporting each other. If we can all support each other as a community even more, which a lot of us already are, but if we can get more and more talent on board to present opportunities to each other, introduce ourselves to other companies that someone else maybe is already working with, that's really the way to go in the future. And that's already starting.
I'm thinking about all the initiatives that you've been involved in. Going back to your website, TanjaMvoice.com, TanjaMvoice.com. Out the very gate, on the very front page, you have a quote, "It's not just the voice that matters, it's how you tell the story." And throughout this conversation, you've shown the importance of intent when it comes to the subtlety of emotion, whether it's the audiobook or audio description performance, and also how you tell the story of the direction that not only disabled performers, but all performers in voiceover can go. These ideas and initiatives that you're putting out there, it is that collaboration and that kind of networking and supportive environment that's going to help, again, decrease that intimidation or those worries that people have and bring everybody else up together. That's what's that, rising tide raises all ships sort of thing.
That's so true. And you're a huge pioneer in connecting us and really lowering the intimidation level for others who are sighted. I mean, you've done so much in the last couple of years. I can't think of many other examples. You're a gem. It's hard to find people that are this passionate about it. So I commend you for all the work that you've done to bring us all together and make us all aware of others in the field and the podcast. I mean, this podcast is yet another way of networking. So many listeners might have a peek and then reach out and meet someone new, especially newer talent that don't know where to start. I hope everyone that's listening knows that they can reach out to any of us. I'm sure all of us would feel the same that have been on the podcast. We all welcome and would love to help someone out as much as we can because we're in it together.
Oh, thanks for saying that. That is part of the initiative here in this podcast and the database for audio description professionals of all kinds, that we do want to showcase the efforts that are being made, the professionalism that's out there. And yeah, you really encapsulated it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Any other social media that you'd like to share beyond your website?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn and just search my name, Tanja, last name Milojevic. And also, I'm co-founder of GetBraille.com, where we produce materials in accessible formats, and we're looking to help make accessibility even easier for people to access, if you will, for people to make their materials or their locations even more accessible, where affordable, and so forth. So if you're curious about that, it's GetBraille.com.
And not only was I curious, but this seems like a perfect postscript to give you a little further endorsement on Get Braille. Can I share my experience at Comic-Con?
Sure.
I had headshots taken for autograph signing at Comic-Con. I was presenting at a few panels last year, and I wanted to bring accessible headshots. So my intent was to go through Get Braille and put a adhesive, clear Braille. It was basically a website that people could go to get the full alt text of what the headshot looked like. And I also got an embosser for my signatures so that people could feel what my headshot signature looks like. And so that was in conjunction with Get Braille. So we worked together and collaborated on that in advance. And we talked about layout and how it would look. And you helped guide the process of where the Braille letterings would go that would make the most sense. And here's the website link and do this. But that was the intent, was to be able to go to Comic-Con, talk about audio description, and then go to the autograph signing station. Not to say, hey, look, get my autograph, but to really present, here's an accessible headshot, and other people can do this too, and here's a great way to do it. So that simple step of including the website, somebody could go straight to the website and get the alt text of the full description of what the headshot looked like. And I had some audio description writer help write what I look like because I can't describe myself.
I hear you on that.
So thank you for getbraille.com. That was really helpful.
Awesome. I'm so glad it worked out. Did anyone use the website out of curiosity? Were there any Braille readers?
Yeah. Obviously, once it's on the website, I'd imagine most people were just using the voiceover on iOS or whatever. It was pretty fun.
That's great. And just a quick transparency into that, it's a clear plastic overlay with Braille on it. So that way it wouldn't get squished, because sometimes cardstock doesn't hold Braille very long. So this way it will have a long life.
It's still there. I saved a few. It's still standing up, each dot.
That's great. We're trying to find better ways of adhering labels onto products like shampoo and conditioner and so forth for the hotel experience. If you go into a room and you want to have products and you have to use Seeing AI or something to figure out what it is, but this way you can just read it right off the bat. So we're experimenting with a few things. We're excited about that. So more to come.
I can hear it. Thanks so much, Tanya, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always such a pleasure.